Hi there, we're here with Dr. Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization, also Adam Holland, and we'll be getting Mike to summarise his discussion he did on hypertrophy yesterday, and also ask him a couple of questions about it. So I'll let you go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So yesterday I talked about an aspect of kind of advanced periodization for hypertrophy, where we're asking the question of how heavy should we lift in order to achieve hypertrophy, but we're asking it on the time course concept where should we alter how heavy we lift from mesocycle to mesocycle to mesocycle over the course of a training block. So for example, we could look at the literature and say, anything between roughly your 5 repetition max and your 30 repetition max is pretty robust for inducing hypertrophic gains. So we could say, we should probably train in all of the rep ranges between that the entire time, and sort of just every mesocycle we train, a third of our training should be in sort of the middle ranges, the 10 to 20 rep range, a third of the training should be heavier in the 5 to 10 rep range, and then maybe another third of the training should be in the 20 to 30 rep range. And that is a fine way to train, it's a fine idea, but as we look a little bit more deeply into what happens over the course of a single training block, which is usually about 3 mesocycles of one sort of overarching goal, like a fat loss phase or a muscle gain phase, as we go from mesocycle to mesocycle to mesocycle, the sort of constraints and benefits that we face might bias us into the direction of altering those repetition ranges, or really how much work we do in those rep ranges. So we end up seeing this pattern where maybe it's a little bit more beneficial to train a little bit more of your volume in the heavier range, 5 to 10 earlier in the first mesocycle. Then most of your training should be probably done in the moderate range, 10 to 20 reps in the middle mesocycle. And then towards the end of a training block, the last mesocycle, there is a decent argument to be made that more of your training than usual should come from the 20 to 30 rep range, which we otherwise sometimes call metabolite training. And there's a couple of good reasons for this, and of course I can't get into all of them in this sort of quick preview, but for example, when you're fresh in the first mesocycle of a training block, you're really primed to train heavy. Coincidentally, that's going to be your lowest volume training, and also you don't need much volume to grow then because you're very new to the training process. You just did some sort of resensitization mesocycle before. Eventually, as your volume climbs over each successive mesocycle, and as you fatigue and as you accumulate a little bit more tissue damage, adding much more heavy training might not be realistic from a you're able to do it perspective, and also maybe not the safest thing. And on the other side, we take a look and say, okay, what if we tried to train super light, high rep at the beginning? Well, that kind of training tends to cause a really rapid adaptation in the body. For example, your vascularity adapts really quickly, and all of a sudden you can't accumulate lactate with nearly as little effort as you could, and you have to do sets and sets and sets to get the same pump, the same burn. So maybe that kind of training is best safe for the end. Coincidentally, when we're a little bit too beat up to train heavy, but look, you can always do more sets of 20 to 30. That's not going to get you hurt. And also, it's this last shot at the end that really sort of puts the exclamation mark on the hypertrophy mesocycle. And then after that, you're at your highest volumes, and you go back into a resensitization of some sort. So you basically start training most of your training heavy in the first mesocycle, moderate average training, 10 to 20 reps. And then the last mesocycle, there might be an argument for doing a little bit more of your training than usual with higher reps. And this also follows a pretty good frequency structure as well, where you tend to train with lower frequencies at the beginning of a block, higher at the end, and lower frequencies are just more conducive to training heavier, and higher frequencies are more conducive to training lighter, because you can squat heavy twice a week. You're probably not going to squat heavy 5 times a week, but you can do very light quad work or something at the 5 times a week, no problem. And as a matter of fact, that kind of stuff doesn't tend to disrupt your connective tissue much. So if you're doing really high rep training, doing it not frequently doesn't make much sense, but doing it frequently makes a lot. So we kind of see this whole synthesis come together. It's just food for thought. It might not be the answer to everyone's hypertrophy plan, but it's probably a good idea to train a little bit heavier in the beginning of a block, more moderate at the middle of the block, and a little lighter at the tail end. That still means every exercise we do, let's say we do squats the entire time, we might still do heavy in the squats. So you figured, well, shouldn't we be doing moderate squats in the second mesocycle and then lighter squats? Well, not necessarily. We can do squats heavy, but then we add leg presses to the program in the second mesocycle and do them moderate. And then we add walking lunges in the last mesocycle and do them light. And we do more of the lunge sets later, not as many leg press sets, very few squat sets, and it ends up biasing the whole program where we still have our really good progressions all the way up in weight. We still put weight on the bar per exercise, but because of the way we add sets and exercises, the average loading falls over the course of the mesocycles. The result is a great deal of hypertrophy. And the last thing I'll say is, this is part of a periodized model for hypertrophy training, and the first thing people can think is say, well, gee, that sounds like we're averaging lighter training over the course of time, and even though the individual exercises are going up, that's good. Isn't averaging lighter and lighter and lighter over the course of each meso kind of the reverse of what you would do with strength training? Yes, but that's not a problem because we're not trying to get necessarily stronger in the 5 to 10 rep range or the 1 to 5 rep range. We're trying to get bigger. And the number one critical factor for hypertrophy is volume. This allows us to increase volume by a radical amount and increase frequency, which also seems to increase hypertrophy a lot. And we could ask the question of, well, what about getting super strong? Does that increase hypertrophy? Well, if you do it at the expense of volume, it doesn't. Right? So the traditional periodized model that's designed for strength power sports has your volume starting high, frequency starting high, etc., and you drop all those factors and peak to get stronger. This doesn't necessarily flip the model upside down, but it sure as heck has some opposite features because we're trending towards another outcome. We want growth, and that's really, I'll conclude my overly long summary with this statement, that what we really want to do, the modern periodization as a science, is an objective view at what are our conditions, what are our needs analysis, and what do we desire to be at the end of this process. And then we arrange training variables to get here. And the way we arrange them can end up looking nothing like periodization for another sport or for another fitness characteristic like strength or power or whatever, but it doesn't have to. If you're cooking a different kind of meal at home, what you buy to cook for it, what it looks like cooking, and how it tastes and looks might be very different depending on what you're cooking. So somebody who's used to making burgers can't be like, oh, where's the burger patty and the bun? Like, well, we're making pizza, those things don't exist. Well, what I thought good cooking means burgers. Like, no, it doesn't. Just the same way as good periodization for any number of fitness characteristics, including hypertrophy, doesn't just look like strength training periodization. It's going to be very different, and that's the whole point.
Right, so that's a great summary, Mike. Thank you. And my question is more around people that want both, so that, that power building type of thing, where, for example, they might go heavy early in the week and go lighter later in the week. How would somebody program that, but also understand the trade-offs so they may not become the strongest or the biggest?
Well, I don't believe in trade-offs. I believe in willpower. And if you just grit your teeth hard enough, like if you growl at the weights, they'll respond. Yeah. Right? If that doesn't work, however, then what we do is trade-offs. Absolutely. One of the best ways to arrange that is to have different phases of training where you're trying to bias your training into the direction of either one of the benefits that you want. And then after that phase is over, you bias it in the direction of the other one. So for example, if you want both a good measure of strength and hypertrophy, you can take 1 to 2 mesocycles and arrange it relatively optimally for hypertrophy, right? So you're doing the sort of training we just described. And then once those mesocycles are over, you rearrange your training relatively optimally towards strength. You drop your repetition ranges in the 1 to 8 rep range, and you drop your total volumes, and you include exercises that are more strength building rather than hypertrophy building, more upright rows and presses versus more lateral raises and front raises and something like that. You've put on a lot of strength and a lot of size, but then the last couple of months have been strength training. Now you need to get bigger again. You flip the focus again and get into hypertrophy training. So you basically have to do a good job with what it is you're doing and commit most of your resources to it all the time. Again, it's almost like, if you want to eat pizza and burgers, do you make sort of like a burger pizza conglomerate thing? And I don't know, it's probably not going to taste great. No, like one night you make pizza and you make a decent pizza, and then another night you make burgers, and it all works out. You get both. If someone says, I want to eat both pizza and burgers, you do a good job making each individually. You don't mix the two together in some kind of like weird, like, it's like Carol made it. Right? Assuming cooking is genetically engineered. So now there is something to say for a slight biasing into the other direction, where during a hypertrophy cycle, keeping in mind that you also want a good measure of strength, you might take your average repetition ranges, and it usually would be like sort of 15 reps would be your average, I suppose, right?
Yep.
If you're just going for pure hypertrophy, you might drop that to 10 on average. So you might do a little bit more training in the 5 to 10 rep range and a little less training in the 20 to 30 rep range all the time in hypertrophy, just because you know that neurologically and muscle fiber composition, you're going to eventually want to optimize for strength. So you don't want to get too far away from that. And then when you're doing strength training, you might keep your volumes a little bit higher and keep in a little bit more accessory work just to continue to uphold maximum amount of musculature, not lose a whole lot. Because if you do like very peaking style strength work, it's going to result in the best strength outcomes, but you might lose a little muscle. So nothing you can't get back, but then the first couple of weeks of hypertrophy work, you're going to have to work to get it back, which is kind of a waste of your time. So if someone is power building and they're doing a strength block, then some of the strength stuff is going to be identical to just what a pure strength training athlete would have, but you're going to pepper in a little bit more volume. The average reps could be just a little bit higher, right? And then for a person involved in a hypertrophy training who is a power builder or whatever, if you look at them versus a pure bodybuilder, they're going to be training just on average a little bit heavier. And here's a really important point. They might never really delete away core strength moves. So like I'm training for pure hypertrophy currently for a long time myself. I don't really care about strength so much by its own. I've sort of walked that path already. I won't do, low bar squats or competition benches for months and years because I don't care. But someone who's a power builder who wants strength and hypertrophy, they may still do the same rep ranges as me, but when they pick their leg exercise, they might still say, okay, at least high bar squats, maybe even some low bar work if they can handle it. Definitely some competition pressing, but in the higher rep ranges. So there's some core exercises they're never going to get away from, because not only are they growing their muscles during that hypertrophy block, but they're saying, you know what, the strength block's going to start soon. I need to be ready for that. I can't get too far away from that. I suppose the pizza burger analogy breaks down entirely at that point, because you're eating the pizza and you're like, but you're thinking about burgers.
Which is me all the time.
For sure.
All right, we've got some great information there with regard to optimizing or changing loading parameters to look at strength and hypertrophy. But I want to bring it back to diet, seeing as we brought up burgers and pizzas and their demonic hybrids. With regard to optimizing, we'll go back to hypertrophy because that's what the subject of the talk was about. If we're looking at maximizing hypertrophy with advanced periodization strategies, does nutritional periodization actually factor in as a viable strategy? Does it have merit? And what might it look like?
Yeah, great question. So nutritional periodization is a real thing, but it tends to occur at the macrocycle level more than at the block level. So within a training block, nutritional approach is rather similar, or really it's unidirectional. It has one goal. For example, a training block of muscle gain basically is multiple mesocycles of training, which are a little bit different and sort of periodized between each other. But the nutritional approach is really similar during that time. It's just generate a hypercaloric diet, supply sufficient protein and carbohydrates, and make sure the body weight is going up as needed. But at the, and then a cutting phase or a fat loss phase, the training is rather different mesocycle to mesocycle, as we discussed. But that entire block might be a very similar nutritional strategy from meso to meso to meso, which is just progressively decrease calories while maintaining sufficient protein and as many carbohydrates as you can get away with. So the nutritional periodization is something that occurs at a macrocycle level. So block to block to block, you'll see distinct nutritional changes. Here's a really good example, or really foundational example. You'll have a block of muscle gain where a hypercaloric diet is used to gain both muscle and fat. And ideally, you'd gain mostly muscle, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So you'll be in a situation where your body will not be used to carrying that much muscle yet, but you'll be at your sort of biggest ever. And what you do is you take 1 month or 2 months to eat at maintenance, and in part psychologically recover from having pushed that many calories, or just do something with your calories versus just eat at maintenance. You keep that body weight up, and then after that, you enter another training block, and you enter a fat loss diet where the purpose is, okay, you've got this muscle and fat, now the fat loss diet gets rid of the fat, and you get back at the end of that fat loss diet to a place where you restart and say, okay, now I'm going to continue to gain more muscle. So you gain muscle and fat, hold the body weight for a second, let everything relax. That's another block. And then your third block, again, is a fat loss block where you do reduction of fat and you sort of zigzag your way up. And eventually, you're just the net effect of every macro cycle, which is 3 blocks in a row, is that you gain muscle, gain muscle, gain muscle, and eventually, you look super jacked, and that's how it works out. And there's other, of course, everything in periodization is what is the demand, what is the need, other needs like contest prep, et cetera, or taking a person who's very overfat and reducing their body fat over time. The nutritional periodization is going to look different, but it occurs at a block level. This block is for this block is for that, this block is for that, and everything is phase potentiated, so one thing makes the next thing go better, or the next thing deals with the side effects we've accrued in the other thing.
Right.
That's it.
Dr. Mike.